About a month ago, one of the members of the class of 1996, Jess Bernstein, came to me with a concern and some ideas. A concern that in this particular year we were going to be in school for this national holiday recognizing the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. And some ideas as to what we might be able to do here today to honor his memory and to commemorate that since we were going to be in school. And Jess had some good ideas, and I asked him to go back and put them in writing. Within a few days he did and came back to me. It was a very, very nice plan, I thought, for what has now become this assembly program. So we set up an appointment with Dr. Bond and met with Dr. Bond and got Dr. Bond's approval to go forward and plan today's assembly. At which point Jess had to go forward and script this out and then select several presenters for today's assembly. In the opening of our assembly, I'd like to personally thank and congratulate Jess for the work that he did in putting this together today. Jess, thank you very much. I'd also like to recognize the following student presenters in the assembly program today: Brandy Cheney-Giles, Dave Pack, Jen Roberts, Dina Yin, Rashna Patel, Krupa Desai, Nana Adam, also Dr. Bond, and the ambassadors for the role that they will play in this morning's assembly. As I considered over the past several days what I might say to introduce this morning's program, recognizing the accomplishments of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., my mind drifted back some 20 years ago when I too was a student at North Penn High School. As the civil rights movement of the early 60s heated up with demonstrations and protests, I, like most of you, lived a comfortable and relatively carefree life as a student in the North Penn area, involved with activities, studies, and friends in school. I was not a social activist, didn't know very much about Martin Luther King, and probably cared less. But as 1961 faded into 1962, and on to 1963, one could not help but be affected as every night on the evening news, new examples of protests, sit-ins at lunch counters, boycotts, and marches confronted you. I can remember my initial reaction was, why are these blacks causing such problems? But after watching white police beat, club, drag, and kick passively disobedient people using water cannon, nightsticks, German Shepherd dogs, you could not help but stop and ask, what is going on here? When the governors of states with state police blocked the doors of the universities of Alabama and Mississippi to stop black students from going to classes at their white-only colleges, you had to ask, why? In this atmosphere of protest, confusion, misunderstanding, and prejudice, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as the articulate spokesman and the focal point of a movement to raise our consciousness of the blight of black Americans. But more importantly, he taught all Americans to bridge the gap between the races, to feel the needs of the poor, and to recognize the rights of all people. It is in this spirit that we recognize this national holiday today, the birth not of a black man, but of an American who inspired all people, black and white, red and brown, and whose words continue to challenge us today.
Today, January 16, 1995, the nation observes the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today, Dr. King is remembered for his unyielding persistence and leadership in the struggle for civil rights. Dr. King was a champion of nonviolent protest and a man who even today is revered for the work he did to help the poor and impoverished everywhere.
Dr. King was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., was a Baptist minister as well as a leader in getting equal salaries for Black American teachers in the South. His grandfather, Reverend A.D. Williams, helped secure the first high school in Atlanta for Black Americans.
When he was 15 years old, Dr. King entered Morehouse College, and his father ordained him a Baptist minister when he was 17. He received his Bachelor of Divinity degree from Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania in 1951, where he was also class president. Then, he went on to receive his PhD from Boston University in 1955. Due to his studies at Crozer and Boston, Dr. King began to examine the works of the Indian nationalist Mahatma Gandhi, whose theories would become the basis for King's method of nonviolent protest. Dr. King met Coretta Scott while in Boston and married her in 1953, and the following year he became a pastor of a Baptist church in Montgomery, Alabama.
In 1954, the Supreme Court had outlawed segregated public education. In the South, many began challenging the large amount of segregation in every area of public accommodation. In 1955, this situation would win Dr. King wide recognition. On December 1st of that year, a Black woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man while traveling on a Montgomery bus. She was put in jail, and within 5 days, the Black Americans in the city had organized the Montgomery Improvement Association, and Dr. King was elected to be its president.
The Montgomery Improvement Association sponsored a 381-day boycott of the buses. During the course of the boycott, King was arrested and jailed. His home was bombed and threats were made against his life. 70 other followers of Dr. King were also arrested. However, the Supreme Court overturned the convictions. The court also issued a mandate which outlawed segregated public transportation in the city. With the success of the boycott, King gained respect as a leader. In 1957, King, with a group of other clergymen, founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. King was president.
In 1959, King visited India and worked more on attempting to understand Satyagraha, or holding to the truth, which was a principle of Gandhi's relating to nonviolent disobedience. In 1960, he became co-pastor with his father of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. This new position allowed him to be more involved in the leadership of the growing civil rights movement.
August 23, 1963, at the now famous March on Washington, King spoke to over 200,000 people gathered near the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. A year later, he received the Nobel Peace Prize for the work he did in the civil rights movement. 1965, he led a march for voting rights from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. In 1966, he led demonstrations in Chicago for better jobs, housing, and schooling for Black Americans. During his time in Washington, King received opposition from local Black Baptists as well as mobs of whites led by neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klan members.
In 1967, King also became associated with the anti-war movement. He spoke out against the war in Vietnam, which he felt was hurting the civil rights movement. Many blacks criticized him for taking a stand against the war, feeling that the black leadership should concentrate more on problems at home. In 1968, Dr. King was in Memphis, Tennessee, to help prove that a nonviolent demonstration in support of the striking garbage collectors union was possible. April 4, 1968, as Dr. King stepped onto the balcony of his motel room, he was shot and killed.
We take the time today to honor Dr. King and all that he stood for. And although Dr. King was a Black man who led the Black struggle, his work has affected all minorities and all the downtrodden throughout the world. We feel it is appropriate today to read parts of some of Dr. King's most important and well-known speeches. In April 1963, Dr. King was in prison for leading a civil rights demonstration in Birmingham, Alabama. While in jail, he wrote his famous letter from Birmingham jail. In it, he said, "We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with America's destiny. We will win our freedom, because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands.
In April 1967, Dr. King spoke out against the Vietnam War, saying, "We must find new ways to speak for peace in Vietnam and justice to the developing world, a world that borders on our doors. If we do not act, we will surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time, reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight."
Upon receiving his Nobel Prize in 1964, King again continued to speak out against violence. He said, "I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of nuclear destruction. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality."
In regards to what he wanted said at his funeral, Dr. King asked that his little triumphs be remembered. He said, "And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell them not to take too long. Tell them not to mention that I have the Nobel Peace Prize. That isn't important. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day, I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to be able to say I did try in my life to clothe those who were naked. If you want to say I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace, that I was a drum major for righteousness, and all the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have fine and luxurious things in life to leave behind, but I just want to leave a committed life behind." Dr. King made this speech exactly 2 months before his assassination.
Then, on the day before he was killed, Dr. King again spoke about death. In the Masonic Temple in Memphis, Tennessee, he said, "Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. And I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land."
Dr. King was assassinated the next day. In black ghettos around the country, outrage that a man of peace was killed so violently resulted in numerous riots. James Earl Ray was convicted for the murder, but many wonder if he was only the agent of a group of conspirators. The answer, however, has not been found.
Of all the speeches King delivered in his lifetime, the most well-known and perhaps the most moving of all is his I Have a Dream speech, which he delivered at the March on Washington. Here to present that speech is Dr. Blott.
On August 28, 1963, I was one of over 200,000 people standing at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington when Martin Luther King said, "I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon of light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing at the corners of the American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. There are those who are asking the devotees of the civil rights movement, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways. and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by the signs stating, "For whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote, and the Negro in New York feels that they have nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied in justice until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It's a dream deeply rooted in the American meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Oh, I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. Oh, I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh will see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith we shall be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that one day we will be free. And this will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring." And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountain of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let it ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and every molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, please let freedom ring. And when this happens and when we allow freedom to ring, we will let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city. We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands in singing the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last."
Thank God Almighty.
don't know if there's any way I can make you feel what I feel. See, I was there, and I lived the civil rights movement, and I stand before you as a person living the legacy. See, I believe that I am in fact free at last because I can stand here in this place at this time and be your principal. I can stand here and say that I've been accepted for who I am, and that's a wonderful, wonderful feeling, and I love you for that. And I have a dream, and you know I love the dream. And I want to share with you my dream for North Bend High School. I have a dream that someday an opposing team can come to North Bend High School with minorities and not have racial slurs hurled at them. I have a dream that one day a band front member who is overweight can march toward the North Bend stands and not be ridiculed because of their size. I have a dream that an Indian student in this high school can wear a mark on her forehead without being scorned. I have a dream that students who wear chains and leather coats are not labeled druggies or acid heads simply because of what they wear. I have a dream that people will be judged by what is in their heart and not how they look. This is the dream that I administer North Bend High School with, and this is the dream that I leave with you. And I believe so strongly that if you can dream it, you can make it happen.
Dr. King's funeral on April 9th. On April 11th, 1968, the 1968 Civil Rights Act was passed. This act prohibited racial discrimination in the sale or rental of housing. Overall, Dr. King was, and still is, an inspiration to civil rights movement everywhere, and a symbol of hope and strength for all people of any background.
In conclusion, we'd like to leave you with something that Dr. King's daughter once said. She said, "They may have killed the dreamer, but they can never kill the dream." Thank you.